I looked around the sprawling, manicured garden of my parents' estate. The afternoon sun in Scottsdale, Arizona was brutal, beating down on the perfectly cut grass and reflecting blindingly off the surface of the infinity pool. There were 100 relatives standing across the patio. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends who had known me since I was a child. They were holding crystal champagne glasses, laughing and smiling in my direction. It was my 27th birthday. For a brief, foolish moment, my heart fluttered. I thought, after all these years of being the invisible daughter, they were finally here to celebrate me. I thought they were here to acknowledge my recent promotion as a senior actuary, or just to say happy birthday. I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong. They were not an audience for a celebration. They were the audience for my execution. The heat radiating from the fake smiles around me felt suffocating. My father, Merrick, stood at the front of the crowd, positioned perfectly near the outdoor bar so everyone could see him. He was a man who lived and breathed for his public image. He waved me over with a smile that did not reach his cold, calculating eyes. The chatter of the crowd began to die down, turning into a heavy, expectant silence. I walked toward him, feeling the uncomfortable pinch of the expensive nude pumps my mother had forced me to wear for this event. Before I could even process the strange atmosphere, the heavy glass doors of the main house slid open. My mother, Blythe, stepped out onto the patio. She was wearing a designer silk dress, her hair perfectly blown out, but her face was twisted into a mask of pure disgust. In her arms, she carried a thick stack of framed documents. My breath hitched in my throat. I recognized those thick black frames. They were my professional actuary certificates, my degree, my state licensing credentials. The things I had starved for. The things I had bled for, working 3 jobs to pay my own way through every single grueling exam because they refused to give me a dime. Without a single word, Blythe walked over to the massive outdoor stone fireplace. She stared dead into my eyes, her lips curled into a sneer. Then, she deliberately ripped the certificates out of their frames, shattering the glass on the stone hearth. She tore the heavy parchment paper into shreds and tossed the pieces onto the cold ashes. The sound of tearing paper echoed in the silent garden. The crowd just watched. Some sipped their expensive drinks. No one gasped. No one moved to stop her. Then, Merrick took a step forward. He handed me a heavy leather portfolio. It looked incredibly expensive, crafted from dark mahogany leather. My hands shook slightly as I took it. I opened the flap, the smell of rich leather hitting my nose. Inside there was a single piece of crisp white paper. It was an invoice. The total printed at the bottom in bold red ink made the blood drain from my face. $500,000. The description read, for room, board, and the inconvenience of raising you. Merrick leaned in close to my face, his voice a low, venomous hiss that somehow carried over the silent patio. Every cent we wasted raising you. Pay it or never contact us again. My stomach dropped so fast I felt physically sick. The silence in the yard was heavy, pressing down on my chest like a physical weight. But the nightmare was just starting. My younger sister, Sutton, the golden child of the family, the self-proclaimed lifestyle influencer, stepped forward. She was wearing a dress that cost more than my monthly rent, her signature smug smirk plastered across her face. She reached over to the patio table where I had set my purse down earlier. She unzipped it, rummaged through, and pulled out the keychain to my apartment. "These aren't yours anymore, Marin," she said, her voice dripping with fake, sugary pity. "Dad always held the deed to that place as a guarantor, and he transferred the title to me this morning. I need a new studio for my lifestyle coaching videos anyway. Your cheap furniture is already being moved to the curb." I could not breathe. I was paralyzed. Then the worst part happened. A man standing near the back of the crowd, holding a plate of appetizers, awkwardly cleared his throat. It was Dashiell, my direct manager at the reinsurance firm. My parents had invited my boss to this twisted party. He looked at the ground, refusing to meet my eyes, his face flushed red with cowardice. "Marin," Dashiell mumbled, loud enough for the closest relatives to hear. "You are terminated from the firm, effective immediately. Your parents gave me a character reference that changes everything. We cannot have liability in our risk management department. I stood there holding the $500,000 bill for my own life. I realized then that this was not a party, it was an eraser. They wanted to wipe me off the map. They wanted me destitute, homeless, humiliated, and broken in front of everyone who shared my blood. I did not scream. I did not cry. As an actuary, my entire career is built on assessing catastrophic risk, controlling panic, and finding the logic in chaos. I looked at my mother's victorious smile. I looked at my father's cruel eyes. I looked at Sutton dangling my keys. I turned my back on them. I did not say goodbye. I did not utter a single word of defense. I just turned around and started walking. I walked out of the heavy iron gates of the estate. The metal clicked shut behind me, and that sound was final. I stopped, kicked off the tight pumps, and held them in my hand. I walked barefoot on the burning asphalt. The concrete scraped the soles of my feet, but the sharp pain was good. It kept me from falling apart. They think I walked away with nothing. They think they left me drowning in debt, with no home and no job, entirely at their mercy. But what my arrogant father and my vapid sister do not know is that my job is finding hidden numbers, exposing patterns, and calculating the cost of lies. And an actuary pushed to the edge of sanity might just be holding the detonator to a financial bomb that will level this entire family. How did a simple birthday turn into a coordinated assassination of my life? And more importantly, what does a woman with nothing left to lose do next? The first mile was pure shock. My mind was a static blur, a white noise machine turned up to maximum volume, as I put one bare foot in front of the other on the scorching pavement. Cars drove past me. I could see the blurred faces of drivers looking out their windows, watching a woman in a nice dress walking barefoot on the side of the road carrying a heavy leather folder. They probably thought I was crazy. The desert sun was relentless, baking the asphalt until it felt like a frying pan beneath my toes. By the second mile, the physical pain truly started. The delicate skin on my heels and the balls of my feet began to blister and break. Every step was a sharp sting, sending a jolt up my legs. But I welcomed the pain. The physical agony in my feet was simple, easy to understand. The pain in my heart was a tangled, rotting mess that I had carried for 27 years, and trying to untangle it right now would break me. This long, agonizing walk home was a forced tour through my own personal museum of pain. The heat radiating from the asphalt somehow brought back the bitter, freezing cold of Christmas when I was 12 years old. I remember standing in the grand living room of that exact estate, shivering in my pajamas. The tree was towering, dripping with crystal ornaments. Sutton had just finished tearing the wrapping paper off a massive box. She pulled out a brand new, pristine white down coat with a real fur trim. It cost more than most families spent on groceries for an entire month. I looked down at my own gift sitting in my lap. It was a patched, faded navy jacket that belonged to my older cousin, smelling faintly of mothballs. The zipper was broken halfway up. When I asked, my voice trembling, why Sutton got a beautiful new coat and I received hand-me-downs again, Merrick had glared at me over his coffee cup. "You just bury your face in textbooks anyway," he had sneered, his voice laced with pure contempt. "What does it matter what you wear? Sutton actually has a presence to maintain. You're just a background character, Marin." I swallowed the heavy lump in my throat and kept walking, my feet leaving faint, dusty footprints on the sidewalk. That was the unwritten rule of the house. Sutton was the investment. I was the burden. Another memory hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. The day my college acceptance and partial scholarship letter arrived in the mail. I had sprinted up the long driveway, tears of joy streaming down my face, clutching the envelope to my chest. I finally had a way out. I ran into the custom marble kitchen to show my mother. Blythe barely glanced at the paper. She was staring obsessively at her tablet, refreshing Sutton's newly created Instagram page. Sutton was a teenager trying to build her brand as a lifestyle influencer, and Blythe was acting as her frantic manager. A few hours later, I went to look for my acceptance letter to fill out the enrollment codes for my classes. I could not find it on the counter. I searched frantically until I saw a familiar piece of thick paper crumpled at the bottom of the kitchen trash can, stained with wet coffee grounds and orange peels. When I confronted my mother, she waved her hand dismissively, not even looking up from the screen. "Oh, I threw that away. We need the cash we promised for your tuition to buy a promotional package for Sutton's account. Her engagement is dropping and she needs more followers. You can just go to community college and figure it out yourself. Stop being so selfish." I had figured it out. I worked 3 jobs. I took out brutal student loans. I studied in the library until my eyes bled and the letters swam on the pages. And the moment I finally bought myself something nice to celebrate my first real paycheck as a junior actuary, a modest, unbranded leather tote bag, Sutton found it. I remembered walking into my cramped childhood bedroom and finding the thick leather strap cleanly snipped in half with a pair of heavy fabric scissors. Sutton had stood in the doorway, batting her innocent, heavily mascaraed eyes, claiming it was a total accident. The truth was, she simply could not stand the idea of me having something beautiful that did not come from our parents' wealth. She needed me to remain the ugly duckling so she could feel like a swan. My feet were bleeding now, leaving tiny, smeared red marks on the pavement, but my mind was crystal clear. Today was not an accident. You do not type up an invoice for $500,000 by accident. You do not invite a boss to a family party just to fire an employee in front of 100 people by accident. You do not transfer a property deed on the morning of a birthday by accident. This was a plan. They had sat down at their expensive dining table, picked the date, picked the venue, and coordinated a ruthless ambush. Why? Because I was independent. Because I did not need their money, and to narcissists, independence is the ultimate threat. They wanted me to crawl back up that long driveway, begging for a bed and a warm meal. They wanted to break my spirit so Sutton would look even brighter, even more successful by comparison. The cruelty of my past was just a series of small, shallow cuts meant to keep me weak. But as I finally reached the dingy exterior of my temporary backup apartment, a cheap place I rented just for storage and emergencies on the other side of town, I realized the plot they executed today was a fatal stab straight to the chest. I unlocked the door to the tiny, cramped apartment with the spare key hidden under the mat. The air inside was stale, smelling faintly of old dust and cheap lemon cleaner. It was a massive downgrade from the condo they had just stolen from me, but right now it was a fortress. My feet were throbbing, covered in dirt and dried blood, my legs shaking violently from the adrenaline leaving my system. I dropped the heavy leather portfolio on the worn-out rug in the center of the room. It made a sickening, heavy thud. Before I could even walk to the tiny bathroom sink to wash my feet, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It had been buzzing nonstop since I left the estate, but I had ignored it. This time, the notification sound was different. It was a direct message on Facebook from my Aunt Ainsley. Ainsley was my mother's younger sister, the ultimate flying monkey of the family. She lived for gossip, drama, and feeding off my parents' wealth like a loyal parasite. She was always the first to do Blythe's dirty work. I opened the message, my eyes scanning the block of text. "Marin, you ungrateful little brat. Your mother is in tears right now. She is hyperventilating in the bathroom. How could you steal from your own company? Dashiell told everyone at the party that you were embezzling client funds, and that is why he had to fire you on the spot to save his own firm. Your poor father is heartbroken. He offered to pay off your massive debts with that invoice, and you just walked away without a word? You are a disgrace to this family. Do not ever show your face at the country club again. Sutton is terrified of you." I stared at the glowing screen, my blood running ice cold. Stealing? Embezzling? Dashiell did not just fire me. He and my parents had concocted a vicious, criminal story to ruin my professional reputation forever. They were salting the earth so nothing would ever grow for me again. They were spinning a narrative to the entire extended family and their wealthy social circle, painting me as a desperate criminal and themselves as the tragic, long-suffering parents who tried to save me. Panic, sharp and icy, finally pierced through my calm exterior. If Dashiell put an accusation of embezzlement on my official employment record, my career as an actuary was dead. The financial industry does not hire people with theft accusations. I would be blacklisted across the entire state. I needed a lawyer. I needed money to survive this siege. I quickly opened my banking app on my phone to check my emergency savings account. I had $50,000 saved up from years of frugal living, skipping vacations, and eating cheap noodles. It was my freedom fund. The app loaded slowly, the blue circles spinning on the screen. The screen finally populated. Available balance, $42. A bright red banner flashed across the top of the screen. Account frozen pending fraud investigation. Please contact branch manager. My breath hitched in my throat. I tapped the screen frantically. How? Then the memory hit me like a freight train. When I was 18, just starting college, my father had insisted on being a cosigner on my primary checking and savings accounts. He claimed it was to help me build credit and that it was just a formality. I had never bothered to remove him because I rarely used that specific bank for anything other than a vault to hold my savings. He still had full administrative access. He had called the bank while I was walking home, reported the funds as fraudulently obtained, and frozen my entire life savings with a single phone call. I sank to the floor, my bleeding feet tucked under me, the rough fabric of the cheap carpet scratching my skin. The walls of the tiny apartment felt like they were closing in, crushing the oxygen out of my lungs. This was not a family dispute over a birthday dinner. This was a calculated, total economic siege. They had taken my home. They had taken my job. They had destroyed my reputation with a horrific lie. And now, they had taken every single dime I had to my name. They wanted me to wake up tomorrow morning, starving, terrified, and hopeless, with no choice but to walk back up that long driveway, fall to my knees, and surrender to them. They wanted a slave to prop up their egos. I looked at the leather portfolio lying on the floor. $500,000. They wanted to drown me in imaginary debt while stealing my real money. I forced myself to stand up. I walked into the cramped bathroom and stood in front of the small, cracked mirror hanging on the door. I looked at my pale face, my ruined designer dress, and the dirt smudged across my cheeks. I felt a fire light up in my stomach. It burned away the sadness. It burned away the panic. You want a war? I whispered to my reflection, my voice barely recognizable, low and raspy. We will have a war. I am standing here with nothing but $42, bleeding feet, and a massive target on my back. What do you think a woman pushed to the absolute edge of human endurance will do next? Surrender? Lay down and die? If you want to see how I tear their kingdom down brick by brick, hit the like button. Because the real destruction is about to begin, and it will be merciless. I did not go to the tiny kitchen to get a glass of water. I did not sit on the edge of the bathtub to wash the dirt and dried blood off my ruined feet. I walked straight out of the bathroom to the cheap folding table I used as a desk in the corner of the room, pulled out my heavy-duty backup laptop from my duffel bag, and opened it. The screen glowed blue, casting a cold, artificial light over my face in the dim room. I typed in my complex alphanumeric password, my fingers flying across the keys with practiced precision. I was not crying anymore. I felt a deep, icy calm settling inside my chest, freezing over the panic. My father thought power was money, shouting, and intimidation. He thought he understood leverage because he bullied people into signing real estate contracts. But he did not understand my world. I am an actuary. I understand data patterns. I understand hidden numbers. And I understand exactly how to find the things people desperately want to keep buried in the dark. The very first pillar they tried to knock down was my career. Without my career, I had no leverage and no future. I needed to rebuild it instantly, tonight, before Dashiell could file any fake paperwork with human resources on Monday morning. Dashiell, the manager who fired me, was a weak, spineless man who constantly sweat through his expensive suits during minor meetings. He was terrified of my father because Merrick was a massive broker for commercial real estate, and Dashiell desperately wanted our reinsurance firm to win a highly lucrative portfolio contract from Merrick's agency. Dashiell thought firing me was a cheap, easy way to buy my father's favor and secure his own bonus. If I called Dashiell right now, he would just stutter, make pathetic excuses, and hang up. I needed to go over his head. I needed to go to the very top. I needed the one person who actually cared about corporate compliance and legal liability. I opened my encrypted professional contact list and found the private cell phone number for Vesper, the chief risk officer at our corporate headquarters in New York. Vesper was a living legend in our firm. She was ruthless, entirely allergic to fraud, and she knew the exact value of my work. A year ago, I had identified a critical flaw in our catastrophe modeling algorithms that saved the company millions in mispriced premiums. As a reward, she had given me her private number and told me to call if I ever hit a wall. My hands were steady as I dialed the number. It rang twice before she answered. Vesper speaking. Her voice was sharp, alert, and annoyed, despite it being late on a Saturday evening. Vesper, this is Maren from the Scottsdale branch. I apologize for calling your personal line on a weekend, but we have a critical, Tier 1 compliance breach that exposes the firm to immediate litigation. There was a heavy pause on the line. The tone of her voice instantly shifted from annoyed to intensely focused. Go on, Maren. I am listening. I was just terminated publicly at a private family event. The termination was executed by Dashiell. He did not provide a severance package, he did not involve human resources, and he explicitly cited a personal character reference from my father, Merrick, as the sole cause. Furthermore, my family is now circulating rumors across their network that Dashiell fired me for embezzling client funds, a claim he apparently endorsed in front of witnesses. I kept my voice entirely devoid of emotion. Facts only. I did not mention my bleeding feet, the stolen apartment, or the ridiculous invoice. I spoke the language of liability. Vesper inhaled sharply. Dashiell fired you at a cocktail party? Without an HR representative present? And he is alleging felony embezzlement without filing a formal audit report with my office first. Yes, I replied calmly, my voice steady. Merrick is currently negotiating a massive commercial property package with our firm. Dashiell terminated me as a personal favor to Merrick in an attempt to secure that contract. This is a severe violation of federal labor laws, corporate ethics, and internal compliance regulations. I respect this firm, Vesper. I do not want to file a massive wrongful termination and defamation lawsuit that will drag the company name through the mud. I just want to analyze data and do my job. I played the card smoothly. The threat of a massive, public lawsuit involving a senior manager taking bribes in the form of illegal employee terminations was a nightmare scenario for any chief risk officer. Vesper did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. Give me 15 minutes, Maren. Do not speak to anyone else, do not answer any emails, and do not contact any lawyers yet. She hung up. I sat in the silent room and stared at the digital clock on the wall. The green numbers ticked slowly. This was the test. Was I the powerless, invisible daughter they raised me to be, or was I the valuable professional I had built myself into? My parents always told me I was nothing without their last name. 14 minutes later, my phone lit up. Maren, Vesper said, her voice hard as forged steel. I woke up the regional vice president. We got Dashiell on a recorded conference call. He cracked under pressure in less than 3 minutes. He admitted he acted entirely outside of protocol to please your father and secure the account. Dashiell's employment has been terminated for cause, effective immediately. My eyes widened in the dark room. Your termination is void, Vesper continued smoothly. It never happened. You are still employed. In fact, we cannot have you working at a branch with compromised leadership culture. I am transferring you directly to my elite risk management team at headquarters. You report to me now. Your parents cannot touch you, and neither can anyone at that branch. We are also adding a 20% pay increase to your base salary and a significant security bonus for handling this internal threat quietly. Thank you, Vesper, I breathed out, feeling the crushing weight lift off my chest. See you online Monday morning, Maren. Set up your home office. I ended the call and leaned back in my cheap folding chair. My parents tried to make me destitute so I would crawl back on my hands and knees. Instead, I got their pathetic puppet fired, secured a massive promotion, and got a raise that doubled my income. I smiled a grim, tight smile. Reclaiming my job was just defense. It was just putting up my shield. Now it was time to draw my sword. It was time to go on the offense. It was time to look deep into the family finances and see what was really hiding in the shadows. I was safe for now. I had my income secured, my career protected by an iron wall at corporate headquarters. But that was not nearly enough. My parents had humiliated me in front of 100 people, tried to ruin my name with vicious lies, and handed me a leather-bound invoice claiming I owed them $500,000. I needed to tear their financial empire apart piece by piece to see what was really holding it up. My father was a ruthless negotiator, but he was an absolute dinosaur when it came to technology. 3 years ago, he had complained bitterly about paying an outside IT firm to set up his home office server. To save a few $1,000s, he ordered me to do it, treating me like unpaid labor. While I was setting up his network, running the cables and configuring the router, I quietly installed a hidden backdoor virtual private network access point. I did not do it to be malicious back then. I did it because I knew he would constantly forget his passwords, lock himself out of his own system, and scream at me to fix it. I wanted a way to reset his credentials remotely without having to drive across town to endure his verbal abuse. Tonight, that forgotten backdoor was my ultimate weapon. I opened a black terminal window on my screen. The cursor blinked a bright white in the darkness of my room. I typed in the command line to connect to his host IP address at the estate. I hit enter. Access granted. He had no two-factor authentication enabled. He had no complex firewalls. He was arrogant, lazy, and thought no one would ever dare touch his kingdom. He was wrong. I started digging through his digital file cabinets. Tax returns, bank statements, client ledgers, credit card bills. My parents projected the image of unimaginable, limitless wealth to the world, but the ledgers told a vastly different, pathetic story. They were bleeding cash at an alarming rate. Massive country club membership fees, luxury car lease payments, designer clothing accounts, private chefs. They were drowning in massive debt just to maintain their fake facade. Then I found a locked, encrypted folder labeled Estate Planning. I ran a quick decryption script I used for work, breaking the simple password in seconds. I opened it. Inside was a subfolder named Grandma Rose Trust. My heart skipped a beat. Grandma Rose was my mother's mother, and she was the only person in that cold house who had ever shown me genuine warmth and love. She died 4 years ago. My parents told me she had left her entire estate to them to manage for the family's future, and that there was nothing specific left for me. I was grieving, exhausted from studying, and young, so I never asked to see the paperwork. I opened a PDF document inside the folder. It was a scan of her original, notarized will. My eyes scanned the dense legal jargon until I hit a highlighted paragraph near the bottom of page 3. I hereby bequeath the sum of $750,000 to my granddaughter, Marin, to be held in trust and released in full upon her college graduation, to ensure she is never reliant on anyone. I stopped breathing. $750,000. She had left it specifically to me. It was my money. Where was it? I frantically searched the digital bank logs tied to the trust account number listed in the will. I traced the transfers line by line. For years ago, right after I graduated and was struggling to pay my rent, the money was moved. But it did not go to my account. Withdrawal: $200,000. Transferred to Merrick and Blythe joint checking. Withdrawal: $400,000. Wire transfer to escrow account, Sedona Vacation Homes. I froze, staring at the glowing letters. The vacation home in Sedona. The gorgeous, glass-walled mountain cabin that Sutton constantly posted on her Instagram, bragging to her followers about how she bought it at 23 because she was a self-made boss babe. My father had forged my signature on the trust release documents. He used my inheritance, the money my grandmother left to protect me from them, to fund their lavish lifestyle and buy real estate for his golden child. The balance remaining in the trust account right now was a pathetic $300. They stole $750,000 from their own daughter. And then, today, they had the breathtaking audacity to hand me a bill for raising me. The betrayal was a physical weight in my chest. It twisted my stomach until I felt sick, a sour taste rising in my throat. They did not just hate me. They were thieves. I saved every single file. I took high-resolution screenshots of the digital signatures, the routing numbers, the timestamps, and the escrow agreements. I backed everything up to an encrypted cloud server they could never, ever touch. This was not a family drama anymore. This was a massive federal felony. This was wire fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement. I had come home feeling like a victim. But sitting in the dark glow of my monitor, listening to the hum of the computer fan, I realized I was now the most dangerous person in their lives. I was holding the match, and they were standing in a room soaked in gasoline. But as I pulled up the main business checking account to log off, a strange, recurring transaction caught my eye. And what I found next proved that the rot ran much deeper than my parents. The transaction log on my father's commercial real estate business account showed a massive outgoing wire transfer on the first day of every single month. It was set up as an automated payment, running like clockwork. Amount: $15,000. Recipient: Sutton Lux LLC. I stared at the screen, my brow furrowed in confusion. $15,000 a month. My parents constantly complained about market downturns, tight profit margins, and high taxes at the dinner table. Where were they getting an extra $180,000 a year in liquid cash to funnel into a shell company owned by my sister? Sutton Lux LLC was the fake company she set up to sell her useless lifestyle coaching courses, which I knew generated zero actual revenue. I traced the incoming deposits that hit the business account just days before the money was sent to Sutton. My blood ran cold, and a wave of pure nausea washed over me. Incoming wire: $15,000. Memo: Calder and Tamsin Retirement Investment Fund. Uncle Calder and Aunt Tamsin. My father's older brother. Calder ran a small, dusty plumbing supply store on the edge of town. Tamsin was a retired pediatric nurse. They were the salt of the earth, hardworking, humble people who lived in a modest ranch house and drove old pickup trucks. They were the ones who used to sneak me extra slices of cake at family dinners when my mother wasn't looking, the ones who always asked about my grades and actually listened to the answer. I remembered Uncle Calder telling me proudly at Thanksgiving last year that Merrick was helping them invest their entire life savings into a high-yield commercial real estate fund. Your dad is a genius with money, Marin. We're finally going to have a comfortable retirement. We might even buy an RV and travel, he had smiled, his calloused hands holding a cheap beer. There was no real estate fund. There were no investments. There was no RV. My father was taking his own brother's hard-earned retirement money, washing it through his corporate business account to make it look like a legitimate transaction, and wiring it directly to Sutton's fake company. But was Sutton just a dumb, spoiled beneficiary? Did she think it was an allowance from our wealthy dad? I needed to know the depth of her guilt. I ran a search for the IP login history on the business banking portal. When you move that much money, the bank logs the device, the location, and the specific user ID that authorizes the transfer. I pulled up the security log for the most recent transfer from last week. User ID: S. Blythe Admin. Device: Sutton's MacBook Pro. Action: authorized transfer. Sutton knew. She was not just passively receiving the money, she was actively logging into the corporate banking system and initiating the transfer from the business account to her LLC. She saw the source of the funds. She saw the memo line with Uncle Calder's name on it every single month. She clicked approve. I hacked into the credit card ledger for Sutton Lux LLC to see what she was spending my uncle's retirement on. I bypassed the weak security questions in a minute. Debit: Chanel Boutique, $4,000. Debit: Private Jet Charter, Cabo San Lucas, $8,000. Debit: Beverly Hills Med Spa, $3,000. It was a slush fund. A criminal slush fund. Uncle Calder was working 60-hour weeks, breathing in PVC dust, ruining his knees on concrete floors, trusting his successful brother to secure his future. And Sutton, the beautiful, innocent golden child who preached about manifesting wealth and positive energy on the internet, was stealing his blood and sweat to buy luxury handbags, charter flights for her friends, and get lip injections. Sutton was worse than my parents. She was a sociopath. She was looking Uncle Calder in the eye at family dinners, hugging him, thanking him for the birthday cards, and then going home to drain his bank account so she could pretend to be rich on the internet. I leaned back in my chair, the blue glow of the screen illuminating the cold, terrifying fury on my face. I had everything. The forged trust fund documents, the retirement fraud logs, the IP addresses proving Sutton's active, knowing involvement in the money laundering scheme. They wanted to serve me a bill for $500,000. I was going to serve them a federal prison sentence. I started compiling a new document, a master PDF, the ultimate financial audit that would burn their fake kingdom to the ground. Thank you so much for watching this far. If you want to see exactly how I dropped this nuclear bomb on their perfect little lives, leave a comment below saying, "I'm Win." That is our secret code for everyone who has stuck with me through this absolute nightmare. I will be hearting and replying to every single comment with that phrase. Stay tuned, because the fallout is going to be spectacular. The digital clock on my cheap microwave glowed bright red in the dark kitchen. It was 3 in the morning on Sunday. I had not slept a single minute since I walked out of that suffocating garden party barefoot. My feet were bandaged with cheap gauze from the corner store, throbbing with a dull, constant ache. But my mind was sharper than it had ever been in my entire life. I sat at my wobbly desk, the bright light of my monitor washing over my face. I was no longer the discarded daughter crying over shredded certificates. I was an actuary in her element, swimming in an ocean of data, pulling together the threads of the most devastating financial profile I had ever built. I opened a blank document. I decided to call it the family audit. This was not going to be an emotional letter. Narcissists feed on emotion. If I sent them a long, tearful message asking how they could betray me, they would just forward it to Aunt Ainsley and the rest of the flying monkeys, mocking me for being hysterical and weak. No, I was going to speak the only language my father truly respected and the only language that could destroy him. Numbers. Cold, hard, unforgiving numbers. I started with page 1. I created a clean, professional cover sheet. In bold, stark black letters, I typed out the title. A financial review of the Merrick and Blythe estate, including a detailed analysis of Sutton Lux LLC. Page 2 was the executive summary. I kept it brutally brief. Yesterday, I was served an invoice for $500,000 for the burden of my existence. In the interest of settling all family debts, I have conducted a thorough audit of our shared financial history. The findings are documented below. Page 3 was dedicated to Grandma Rose. I inserted the high-resolution scan of her last will and testament. I used a bright yellow digital highlighter to mark the exact paragraph where she left $750,000 to me. Right below that, I placed the bank logs showing my father forging my signature to release the funds. But I did not stop there. The shocking numbers needed context. I calculated the compound interest that money would have earned over the last 4 years if it had been properly invested in a standard index fund. The total stolen from me was not just $750,000. With interest, it was closer to $900,000. I placed a picture of the Sedona vacation cabin they bought with my money right next to the forged signature. The visual contrast was sickening. Page 4 was where the real horror began. This was the section dedicated to Uncle Calder and Aunt Tamsin. I titled it, "The Retirement Fraud." I took the incoming wire transfers from Uncle Calder, the ones labeled as commercial real estate investments, and placed them on the left side of the screen. On the right side of the screen, I placed the outgoing wire transfers from my father's business account directly into Sutton's fake lifestyle company. I highlighted the dates. Money came in on the 30th of the month from a hard-working plumber. Money went out on the 1st of the month to a spoiled 24-year-old. The total stolen from Calder over the last 2 years was $360,000. Page 5 was the masterpiece. The true face of the golden child. I pulled the credit card statements from Sutton Lux LLC. I wanted everyone to see exactly what Uncle Calder was unknowingly funding. I pasted screenshots of Sutton's lavish Instagram posts right next to the bank charges. A picture of her holding a new designer bag on a private jet, captioned with some toxic positivity quote about working hard and manifesting wealth. Right next to it, The bank records showing an $8,000 charge for the jet charter and a $4,000 charge at a luxury boutique, paid for by the stolen retirement funds. But I found something else while digging through Sutton's personal credit files. Sutton was not just spending stolen money. She was drowning in her own secret debt. To maintain the illusion of her influencer lifestyle, she had opened 6 different secret credit cards and maxed them all out. Her hidden credit card debt was staggering: $1.2 million. My parents thought their golden child was a successful entrepreneur. The truth was, she was a walking financial black hole, a massive liability waiting to implode. I organized all 25 pages into a single, flawless PDF file. There were no insults. There were no exclamation points. Just undeniable proof of wire fraud, embezzlement, and staggering financial ruin. It was a digital bomb. I saved the file to my desktop. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my burning eyes. The sun was just starting to rise over the desert horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. I looked at the file icon. My finger hovered over the mouse. Once I sent this, there was no turning back. The family would be over. The holiday dinners, the forced smiles, the desperate hope that maybe one day they would love me, all of it would be incinerated. I paused, looking out the dirty window of my apartment. If you were sitting in this chair, looking at the evidence that your own flesh and blood had stolen your future and robbed your favorite uncle blind just to buy designer shoes, would you press send? Let me know in the comments. Because what happens next is a chain reaction that nobody could stop. I waited until Monday morning. I wanted maximum impact. I wanted them to be awake, sober, and unprepared. I wanted the business week to be in full swing so the professional consequences would hit them like a freight train. At exactly 8 in the morning, I opened my secure, encrypted email client. I attached the 25-page PDF document titled Family Audit. I began typing the recipients into the address bar. First, Merrick and Blythe. Second, Sutton. Third, Uncle Calder and Aunt Tamsin. Fourth, Aunt Ainsley, just to make sure the gossip spread like a raging wildfire through the country club circuit before noon. Then I went for the jugular. I added the corporate email addresses of every single member of the board of directors at my father's commercial real estate brokerage. These were the men and women who trusted him with multi-million-dollar property portfolios. And finally, I copied a prominent federal fraud attorney in Scottsdale, a man known for tearing corrupt businessmen to shreds in court. I did not write a long, drawn-out message in the body of the email. The documents spoke for themselves. I simply typed one sentence. In response to the $500,000 invoice presented to me on my birthday, please find attached a comprehensive review of all outstanding family debts and fraudulent wealth transfers. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. My hands were freezing cold despite the rising heat of the morning. I stared at the screen for 10 long seconds. I thought about the torn certificates in the fireplace. I thought about the smirk on Sutton's face as she dangled the keys to my stolen home. I thought about Uncle Calder's calloused hands, working overtime to fund her lip injections. I clicked send. The progress bar flashed blue for a second, and then the screen cleared. Message sent. I closed the laptop with a soft click. I stood up, walked into my tiny kitchen, and filled a kettle with water. I carefully measured out some cheap instant coffee into a mug. I forced myself to go through the mundane motions of making breakfast. I needed to stay grounded because the shockwave was coming. It took exactly 14 minutes. At 8:14, my phone screen lit up. The silence of the apartment was shattered by the harsh, vibrating buzz against the cheap wood of my desk. Incoming call, Merrick. I watched it ring. I did not move. It went to voicemail. Immediately, it rang again. Incoming call, Blythe. Then, a text message from Sutton. What the hell is this? What did you just send to my sponsors? I had forgotten to mention, I also copied the 3 small brands that sponsored her Instagram page. The phone did not stop. It was a relentless, chaotic symphony of panic. The notifications rained down like hail. I poured the hot water into my mug, stirring the dark liquid slowly. I walked over to the desk and picked up the phone just to watch the chaos unfold in real time. Text from Aunt Ainsley. Marin, tell me this is a sick joke. Did Merrick really steal from your grandmother? Call me right now. Text from Merrick, take it back. Send a follow-up email saying you were hacked. I will give you whatever you want. Answer the damn phone. Voicemail from Blythe, transcription on screen. Marin, please, honey. We can talk about this. Do not ruin your sister's life over a misunderstanding. Please call your father, he is having chest pains. They were not sorry. They were terrified. The facade had cracked, and the ugly, rotting truth was spilling out onto the pristine floors of their mansion. They were watching their entire social and financial existence evaporate in real time. Then a different text came through. It was from Uncle Calder. Marin, I am at the bank right now waiting for the manager to open the doors. Is the PDF true? Did he take it all? My throat tightened. I quickly typed back the only message I sent that day. I am so sorry, Uncle Calder. It is all true. Freeze your accounts immediately and show the manager page 4. I put the phone on silent, turned it face down on the desk, and took a sip of my bitter coffee. The digital assassination was complete. The evidence was in the hands of the people they feared most. I sat on my cheap folding chair, wrapped in a thin blanket, listening to the muffled sounds of the traffic outside my window. For the first 27 years of my life, I was the one walking on eggshells. I was the one terrified of making a mistake, terrified of their anger, terrified of not being enough. Now, the tables were turned. The silence in my apartment was a weapon, and they were bleeding out on the other side of the city. But I knew my father. He was a cornered animal, and cornered animals do not just surrender. They attack. The heavy, peaceful silence of my room was violently interrupted by a loud, aggressive pounding on my front door. It was not a polite knock. It was the sound of someone trying to break the frame. Marin, open this goddamn door. My father's voice was muffled through the cheap wood of the apartment door, but the raw, unhinged panic in his tone was unmistakable. He hit the door again, the cheap metal of the deadbolt rattling against the frame. I did not flinch. I slowly set my coffee mug down on the desk. I walked quietly to the door and looked through the scratched peephole. Merrick looked nothing like the polished, arrogant patriarch who had handed me an invoice just 36 hours ago. His expensive designer suit was wrinkled. His tie was pulled loose, hanging unevenly around his neck. His face was flushed a deep, unhealthy red, and he was sweating profusely. The mask had slipped entirely. He looked like exactly what he was, a desperate, petty thief who had just been caught. I know you're in there, Marin, he shouted, his voice cracking. Open the door right now. We need to fix this before the board meets at noon. I stood on the other side of the door, leaning my forehead against the cool wood. I did not unlock it. I did not even unhook the chain. There is nothing to fix, Merrick, I said. My voice was eerily calm, carrying clearly through the thin door. The audit is accurate. You crazy little bitch, he screamed, kicking the bottom of the door. You're trying to destroy your own family over a stupid prank at a party? I will sue you for defamation. I will drag you through court until you are bankrupt. I almost laughed. It was a cold, hollow sound. You cannot sue me for defamation when I have the IP logs showing Sutton authorizing the transfers from your business account, I replied smoothly. Truth is an absolute defense to defamation. And by the way, I am already bankrupt. You made sure of that when you froze my savings yesterday. There was a heavy pause on the other side of the door. The sound of his heavy, labored breathing filled the silence. When he spoke again, the rage was gone, replaced by a pathetic, whining desperation. The tyrant was begging. Marin, please, he whimpered. The board of directors just suspended my access to the corporate network pending an emergency investigation. They're talking about calling the SEC. You have to send an email saying you fabricated the documents. I will give you the $500,000. I will buy you a new house. Just make it go away. He was trying to bribe me with my own stolen money. He still thought everything in the world was a transaction. He still thought I was the little girl who craved his approval. I do not want your money, I said quietly. I reached over to a small table near the door. Before he arrived, I had printed out a single sheet of paper from the Department of Justice website. I slid the paper slowly under the gap at the bottom of the door. "What is this?" he asked, his voice trembling as I heard the paper rustle in his hands. "Read it," I demanded. I waited. I could hear him reading the words. It was the federal sentencing guidelines for wire fraud, embezzlement, and elder financial abuse. "You taught me how to calculate costs, Merrick," I said, my voice dripping with ice. "You taught me that everything has a price. That is the cost of stealing from your own mother. That is the cost of robbing your own brother. You are looking at 10 to 15 years in federal prison." Suddenly, I heard a tinny, screeching sound coming from his side of the door. It was his cell phone. He had it on speaker. It was Blythe. "Merrick," my mother shrieked through the phone, her voice hysterical. "Ainsley just called me. She told everyone at the club. We are ruined. And the dealership just called. They are trying to flag the payment for Sutton's car." "Shut up, Blythe. I am trying to fix it," he roared into the phone. "You fix it right now, or I swear to God I will tell the investigators that you orchestrated the whole thing without my knowledge. I will not let you drag Sutton down with you." I closed my eyes and listened to the beautiful, chaotic music of their empire crumbling from within. They were already turning on each other like starving wolves. The perfect family was eating itself alive. "Marin," Merrick begged again, ignoring his screaming wife on the phone. He was sobbing now. Real, ugly tears. "Please. I am your father. You stopped being my father the day you threw my future in the trash to buy her followers," I whispered. "Go home, Merrick. Talk to your lawyer. You are going to need him." I heard another beep from his phone. "Wait," he gasped, looking at his screen. "Calder is calling me." "You should probably answer that," I said. "He just left the bank." I listened to his heavy footsteps stumbling away from my door, echoing down the cheap hallway. He sounded like a broken old man. I turned around and slid down the door until I was sitting on the floor. I wrapped my arms around my knees. I was shaking, but not from fear. The heavy, suffocating chain that had been wrapped around my neck for 27 years just snapped. I was free. The collapse of the Merrick and Blythe empire did not happen in secret. It happened in agonizing, public slow motion, and I watched it all unfold from a safe distance. Over the next 3 weeks, the shockwaves of the family audit ripped through our entire social circle. I did not answer any calls from my parents or my sister. I got my updates from Uncle Calder, who called me every evening, and, surprisingly, from the local business news. The first domino to fall was the career. 2 days after my email, the board of directors at the commercial real estate firm convened an emergency meeting. They did not just fire my father, they publicly severed all ties with him in a press release to protect their own liability. The character reference he had used to try and ruin my life became the exact weapon they used to destroy his. They stated they had zero tolerance for financial misconduct. His license as a broker was suspended pending a state investigation. Then came the lawsuits. Uncle Calder was a kind man, but he was not a fool. When the bank manager confirmed that his entire life savings had been funneled into a shell company for luxury goods, Calder was devastated, but then his devastation turned to righteous fury. He hired the fraud attorney I had copied on the email. Calder filed a massive civil suit against Merrick, Blythe, and Sutton Lux LLC. Because of the overwhelming evidence in the digital logs, the judge granted an immediate freeze on all of my parents' and Sutton's assets. They could not move a single dime. I took a drive past their estate one afternoon about 2 weeks later. I parked my beat-up sedan down the street and watched. There were large moving trucks backed into the grand driveway, but they were not luxury movers. They were court-appointed liquidation teams. I sat in my car and watched men in heavy boots carrying out the custom furniture. I saw them carrying the antique dining table where I was never allowed to speak. I saw them hauling out the expensive velvet sofas and the massive oil paintings. It was all being tagged and loaded into the trucks to be auctioned off to pay for restitution. It turned out, without the stolen money to prop them up, they had zero actual equity. They were drowning in massive debt. Then, the ultimate irony happened. A heavy-duty tow truck backed up to the pristine 3-car garage. The driver hopped out and hooked up the white Porsche SUV. Sutton's pride and joy. Suddenly, the front door flew open. Sutton ran out into the driveway. She looked entirely unrecognizable. She was not wearing her flawless makeup. Her hair was a tangled mess, and she was wearing oversized, stained sweatpants. "You cannot take it," she screamed at the tow truck driver, flailing her arms. "It is mine. My company bought it. I need it for my brand." The driver did not even look at her. He just chewed his gum and kept working the hydraulic levers. The luxury SUV lifted into the air. "Daddy, do something!" Sutton shrieked, her voice echoing down the wealthy street. My father walked slowly out of the house. He looked 20 years older. His shoulders were slumped, his face pale and drawn. He was wearing an old, faded t-shirt. He did not look at Sutton. He just stood on the porch and watched the car go. "It is gone, Sutton," he said quietly, his voice hollow. "Everything is gone." "But how am I supposed to go to the country club?" she wailed, stomping her foot on the pavement like a toddler. "Take the bus," he muttered, turning around and walking back into the empty house. I smiled in the shadows of my car. The irony was poetic. The BS Lifestyle LLC was forcibly dissolved by the state. Sutton's brand died overnight. When Aunt Ainsley spread the news that Sutton had been funding her lavish influencer lifestyle by stealing the retirement funds of her own hardworking uncle, her Instagram followers turned on her viciously. The comments on her old photos were brutal. They called her a fraud, a thief, and a parasite. She deleted her entire account 3 days later. Without the stolen money and without the fake social clout, Sutton was nobody. She had no college degree because she thought she was too good for it. She had no real work experience. A week later, Aunt Tamsin called me over tea. "You will never guess who I saw at the mall today, Marin," Tamsin said, trying to hide a satisfied smile. "Who?" I asked. "Sutton. She is working at that cheap clothing store near the food court. The one that sells the neon crop tops." "You're kidding," I said, my eyes widening. "I am not." She was standing at a table, aggressively folding denim shorts. I heard from Ainsley that she tried to apply for a management position at a boutique, but when they ran a background check and saw the pending civil litigation for fraud, they threw her resume in the trash. "She is working minimum wage." I nodded slowly. It was perfect justice. The golden child was finally working for the clothes she wore, forced to live the reality she had always mocked me for. My parents were forced to sell the massive estate at a steep loss. After paying back Uncle Calder, paying the staggering legal fees, and returning the stolen trust fund money to a court-ordered blocked account in my name, they had absolutely nothing left. They had to move into a tiny, cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the worst side of town. No garden, no gates, no infinity pool. The wealthy social circle they loved more than their own daughter completely evaporated. The 100 relatives and friends who came to the birthday party vanished. No one wants to be associated with exposed embezzlers. My mother, who used to be the reigning queen of the country club scene, was now a total pariah. I ran into Blythe once at a discount grocery store. She was pushing a squeaky cart. She picked up a box of expensive crackers, looked at the price tag with a pained expression, and slowly put them back on the shelf to grab the generic brand. She turned around and saw me standing in the produce aisle. I froze. She looked small, frail, and exhausted. I thought she would scream at me. I thought she would curse my name. Instead, she just looked down at the linoleum floor, her cheeks burning dark red with intense shame. She turned her cart around and practically ran down the aisle to avoid me. For the first time in her life, she felt the crushing weight of humiliation. I watched her go, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no pity. The kingdom they built on lies had collapsed into dust, and all it took was one person finally turning on the lights. It has been 6 months since the birthday party that changed everything. My life is incredibly quiet now, but it is a peaceful, beautiful kind of quiet. I still live in my small, modest apartment. I could afford to move, but I like it here. It feels like a sanctuary I built with my own hands. My career skyrocketed. Vesper kept her word. I am now a lead risk analyst at corporate headquarters, working entirely remotely from my desk by the window. I received my retention bonus, my massive raise, and the profound respect of my colleagues. And surprisingly, the legal system worked in my favor. The court seized the remaining equity from the sale of my father's estate to repay the debts he owed. I received the entire $750,000 from Grandma Rose's trust fund, plus the calculated interest. I did not buy a white Porsche. I did not buy designer clothes or charter private jets to take photos. I paid off the remainder of my brutal student loans in one single, glorious click. I fully funded my own retirement accounts. And I put the rest of the money into a high-yield, secure investment portfolio. It is my permanent freedom fund. It means I will never, ever have to be dependent on another human being for survival as long as I live. I sit at my desk on a bright Sunday morning. The Arizona sun is shining through the window, warm and inviting. I open my laptop to check my emails. The encrypted folder on my desktop, the one labeled Family Audit, is still sitting there. It holds the bank logs, the forged signatures, the horrible text messages, and the invoice. I open the folder and look at the files one last time. It all feels like ancient history now. It feels like a dark, twisted story about a completely different person. A person who was scared, a person who desperately wanted to be loved by a family who was entirely incapable of loving her. I look at the digital invoice for $500,000. It used to make me feel sick. Now, it just makes me smile. I do not need these files anymore. I do not need to hold on to the heavy, toxic proof of their betrayal. I know exactly who I am, and I know exactly what I am worth. I select the folder. I right-click the mouse. I hover over the word delete. A small warning box pops up on the screen. Are you sure you want to permanently delete these items? I take a deep breath. Yes. I click the button. The folder vanishes from the screen forever. The heavy weight I have been carrying in my chest for 27 years evaporates with it. I look out the window. The city is waking up. I see people walking their dogs, drinking coffee, living normal, peaceful lives. I am alone in this apartment, but for the first time in my existence, I am not lonely. My phone buzzes on the desk. It is a text message from Uncle Calder. Morning, kiddo. Tamsin is making her famous lasagna tonight. Come over around 6. We got a new board game we want to try. I smile, a genuine, warm smile that reaches my eyes. I type back quickly. I will be there, Uncle Calder. Bringing the garlic bread. I realize something profoundly important as I set the phone down. Family is not about blood. Blood is just a biological accident that makes you relatives. Love, respect, and loyalty are what make you a family. Merrick, Blythe, and Sutton were my relatives, but they were never my family. Calder and Tamsin are my family. I stand up and stretch my arms above my head. I feel incredibly light. The crushing expectations are gone. The constant fear of not being good enough is gone. I walk past the small mirror in my hallway and catch my reflection. I do not see the invisible, discarded daughter anymore. I see a woman who is terrifyingly strong. I see a woman who walked barefoot through a fire set by her own parents and came out the other side forged in steel. I am not a victim. I am Marin. And for the first time in my life, I know that being Marin is more than enough. I grab my keys, my own keys to my own simple, reliable car, and I walk out the door. The sun is warm on my face. I am finally free. I have reclaimed my life and demanded justice, but the fallout was catastrophic. By exposing the truth, I single-handedly drove my parents into poverty, forced my spoiled sister into minimum wage retail, and destroyed my father's entire professional legacy. Some people in our extended family still whisper that I am cold-blooded and ruthless for going that far. So, I have to ask you, the people who have listened to my story. If you were in my shoes, standing barefoot on the asphalt with $0 in your bank account, knowing your own parents stole your future to buy a Porsche for your sister, would you have done the exact same thing? Or do you think I went too far by destroying their lives completely? I really want to know your thoughts, so please let me know down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching my story today. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear more insane Reddit drama stories about toxic families getting the karma they deserve, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps out, and I will see you in the next one.